Hello everyone. I am President Sunday, and I talk about political theory and philosophy and so on and so forth on this channel, as well as other weird things, but recently I've been taking a really hard dip into philosophy and critical theory. We had a long reading list published recently on how to sorta, kinda understand Deleuze, and in the light of that, a whole lot of people were asking, can you make a similar reading list for understanding Friedrich Nietzsche? Deleuze obviously is heavily influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche. I've been talking a lot about Friedrich Nietzsche on the channel in the last couple of months. How would you recommend we start reading Nietzsche to sort of step into this ourselves? And so that's what this video is. This is going to be my reading list for sorta, kinda understanding Friedrich Nietzsche. A lot of people find Nietzsche very difficult to get right. Even if they don't realize it, a lot of people on YouTube get Nietzsche very wrong. People who try really hard. I don't think this is just because Nietzsche is difficult. I don't think Nietzsche's writing is very difficult, in fact. His writings veer more towards the literary than the technical. The reason I think people really have a lot of trouble with Nietzsche is because when they start reading him, they've already heard so many cliches about Nietzsche before. Like an anime villain. They've heard quotes, they've heard lines, they've heard God is dead, they've heard what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, they've heard the Ubermensch, usually with a very German Indiana Jones villain type inflection, Ubermensch, like that. Nietzsche's very quotable, it's part of the pleasure of reading him. However, these can evoke an image of the man that does not reflect what he was actually doing. Great for publicity, bad for education. And so a part of my strategy for this reading list really is to target the ways of thinking that Nietzsche was targeting, and not so much to get you to those cool, quotable moments, because I actually think they're misleading. A part of me wishes that Nietzsche was more boring than he was, because people would misinterpret him less, I hope. Because as it is, people read phrases like the revaluation of all values and think, oh, Nietzsche's a Reddit atheist, he thinks we need to abandon compassion and so on and so forth, and yeah, sort of, but that's so far from the core of what he's actually doing. Nietzsche was not a Reddit atheist, okay? He actually expressed a lot of contempt for that kind of person. Having failed to understand this, a lot of people will read Nietzsche's later socially and politically oriented writings as if he was a fascist, or a racist, or a reactionary. And the fact is, he couldn't be farther from it. Honestly, I actually consider Nietzsche in many cases to be more emancipatory for a leftist like myself than most cherished leftist theorists of his time. But no more dilly-dallying. You want to know my opinion of what you should read to understand Nietzsche, to step into understanding Nietzsche for yourself, so let's get on with it. And to start with, maybe this will come out of left field, but I'm not going to recommend Nietzsche at all, but instead I'm going to recommend a French contemporary of Nietzsche who, while radically different in his conclusions and with seemingly no formal influence by Nietzsche himself, arrived nonetheless at eerily similar positions, reached, however, by some significantly different arguments. The French philosopher to whom I am referring is Henri Bergson. Specifically, I'm going to recommend his book, Time and Free Will, an essay on the immediate data of consciousness. So, why start with Bergson? Bergson's Time and Free Will, like the first text I will actually recommend by Nietzsche, Twilight of the Idols, is all about breaking down entrenched mechanistic and dualistic intuitions in our thinking. Because Bergson engages with more well-known scientific issues than Nietzsche does, I think he engages these intuitions in a more clear and recognizable fashion. The aim of the game here, remember, is to set you up to approach Nietzsche with the right questions, to understand Nietzsche, not just to read him. Nietzsche is an atheist, for example, yes, and he is a critic of received morality, of course, but he's doing something much more profound than this. Our reason is conditioned by the needs of an organism, us, and our very perception of the world is a falsification to the end of fulfilling those needs, the needs to eat, to move, to navigate. There is another reason to start with Bergson, though. Bergson, while not an atheist like Nietzsche, in fact he bordered on the mystic, engages in the same kinds of critiques as Nietzsche does of human intuition and cognition as a guide to capital T truth. Nietzsche's pessimism isn't the pessimism of a vulgar atheist who believes that the world simply reduces to dumb fundamental units and that it can be as thoroughly understood as the rules of a computer game. The materialism on display in Nietzsche, and more obviously showcased in Bergson, is not one which regards the material as lacking the spiritual, but rather one which considers the spiritual/material distinction to be wholly lacking in substance. TLDR, I am suggesting that you start with Bergson's Time and Free Will because it will get you thinking about the assumptions and errors that are central to the negative part of Nietzsche's project in a way that will help you approach Nietzsche not just as an atheist and an amoralist, but as a radical relativist who completely undercuts philosophy as it had been done up to his time. As Nietzsche wrote, as long as you still experience the stars as something above you, you lack the eye of knowledge. That, in a phrase, is what this reading list is meant to help you unlearn. Now, with that not Nietzsche book out of the way, I'm going to recommend you start Nietzsche proper with Twilight of the Idols. I recommend the translation by Judith Norman, published by Cambridge, if you can get a hold of it. Otherwise, the Portable Nietzsche by Kaufmann is perfectly fine. Specifically, I want you to pay very close attention when reading the section on the 4 great errors. These should dispel any notion that Nietzsche is even capable in his mature philosophy of being a reactionary or a conservative or a racist, as his philosophy actually demands the destruction of old forms and a denial of the essential nature of any organization of matter. Indeed, the very notion that there are such things as discrete objects or even categories under which like can be grouped with like, Nietzsche will argue is a projection onto nature of the soul superstition. The idea that there are causal agents like spirits in the world who simply and of themselves bear causal powers and which cannot be reduced to arrangements of smaller units. He regards the atom as literally a soul in our cognition. Therefore, obviously, there can be no coherent things like races, right? That seems to follow, or nations. Just as there is no individual, we are all little communities of even smaller communities, and our greatness is that we are a means to produce something beyond us, just like everything else. Following this, I'm going to recommend Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morals. I highly recommend the translation by Adrian del Caro of these books, and if you get the Stanford edition, they both come together. Otherwise, once again, the basic writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, translated by Kaufmann, is fine. Listen, a quick word on translations. There are no perfect translations, so don't waste time worrying about getting the best translation if that will take extra time or will be difficult or expensive for you. Every translation is a falsification. This is something Nietzsche will hammer into your head as you read him. The best way to read someone in translation is to read different translations together. Read multiple translations. Now, this doesn't mean you have to read every book twice. Just check with a PDF of a different translation as you go if something seems strange, like it's something that could be kind of difficult to render between different languages. You'll recognize it when you see it in all likelihood. One of the reasons why I recommend the Cambridge editions more often than not is because they will often come with notes that will actually tell you the reasons behind the differences in their translations from other translations, thus saving you some time. That being said, again, just get whatever is available and read. That's what's important. Get started, start getting it into your head. If you never read any translation, you'll never know Nietzsche. And again, as with my Deleuze reading list, make sure to give yourself time to read these slowly and carefully. Let yourself be slow. This isn't a video game or a contest. It is more important to understand what you're reading than to finish it quickly. A third of these books, well read, is better than all of them read carelessly. Okay, after Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morality, and I recommend you reading those one after the other, now we get to the good part, at least my favorite part of Nietzsche's published writings, the gay science, or the joyous science. By the way, just as a brief aside, I always find it so funny when translations of the gay science shy away from the title the gay science and put the joyful science or the joyous science on the cover, because invariably when they do this, when you look at the introduction by the editor, it'll say, well, now, look, I know that the word gay has a different connotation today than it did back then. It doesn't refer to homosexuality. It's like, we get it. And when they put the joyful science in that light, it just really feels like they're saying, this is the joyful science, no homo. Like, we're adults. We're reading Nietzsche. Presumably we're adults. You don't need to do this. Anyways, following the gay science, I recommend Thus Spoke Zarathustra. You don't need my commentary or explanation for these at this point. By this point, having read the previous material, you will know why this is important. This is where it gets really good, in my opinion, but I would strongly recommend, again, going in the order that I have recommended so far, because there's going to be a ton of stuff that will just be so much more difficult to get properly if you're coming to Nietzsche with all of the false impressions that popular media shoves down our throats about who Nietzsche was. That said, once you've gotten to this point, you're in for a treat, in my opinion. This is Nietzsche at his best and his most fun. For translations, I recommend, again, the Stanford edition, translated by Adrian Caro for the Joyous Science. The Cambridge edition of the Gay Science is also fine. Kaufmann's, again, is fine, but it's published as a separate volume. It's not included in the Portable Nietzsche or in the Basic Writings of Nietzsche, and so you may as well get one of these other editions because it's not really that much cheaper. But again, it's 2025. I'm sure if you searched for it, you can find a PDF somewhere. There's no reason to forego the best translation available. For Thus Spoke Zarathustra, highly recommend the Cambridge, again translated by Adrian Caro. But, once again, this is also available in the Portable Nietzsche, translated by Walter Kaufmann, which, again, ignore the people on Reddit. Kaufmann is fine. There are problems, but you will figure those out as you read other translations later on. What's important right now is that you just get it into your head. The differences are going to be minute. It will not poison your reading of Nietzsche forever, I promise you. Just start reading. And after you've read all of these, where do you go next? In all honesty, it's your choice. I don't personally regard Nietzsche's earlier writings as at all essential to understanding his philosophy, but if you want to go that way, Daybreak is the best of his pre-gay science writing, in my humble opinion. And honestly, I'm actually a strong believer of reading in the opposite of a chronological order. I always recommend going from the latest to the earliest. Why? Well, because all of this stuff was written and published and translated, in many cases, long before any of us were reading any of this stuff, which means that earlier material, that is all being translated in the light of the later material, even as it was written. Like, The Gay Science, for example, was originally 4 books. The 5th book was written after Thus Spoke Zarathustra was published. How do you read that in chronological order? The answer is, you don't. You just read it and you sort it out as you go. You can do that. You have a brain. You have memory. Don't scare yourself out of reading stuff because it's not in the exact perfect chronological order or in the perfect translation. Have some faith in yourself. Read the lesser translations. Get it into your head. You will be fine. That said, something else you could do is just take a break from reading Nietzsche after Zarathustra and read some secondary literature if you really want to get into it. I recommend Pierre Klossowski's Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, which in my opinion is the most incredible exegesis on Nietzsche's philosophy ever written, even better than Deleuze's Nietzsche and Philosophy, which is also very good. And it makes heavy use of Nietzsche's unpublished notebooks, which are filled with just some insanely good material, sometimes better than his published books, which provide a lot of fascinating insight into how Nietzsche himself understood Nietzsche. Additionally, I might also recommend Julian Young's Friedrich Nietzsche, a Philosophical Biography, which I have been having so much fun reading. However, please don't buy a physical copy. It is terribly constructed. I'll explain why in a moment. See, because I personally like owning hard copies of books, and therefore I am always on the lookout for well-constructed editions of books that I like. The problem is that the market is full of cheaply produced books that will simply not last even light use, and their qualities are not advertised when you buy them on Amazon. It is luck of the draw, and buying a hard copy that will only fall apart in your hands defeats the purpose, so we need to be practical. So here is a guide to buying Nietzsche books based on publisher and vendor, and I'm going to be specifically paying attention to quality of build. If you're spending money on a physical copy, it should be something that will actually last you at least 2 read-throughs, and realistically, for what most publishers are charging, they really should be lasting much more, and a lot of them just don't. So let's go down the list. First of all, Cambridge. If you're getting Cambridge editions, I highly recommend you buy used, and preferably ones published over 5 years ago, maybe more. You'll see brand new copies of Cambridge philosophy books on Amazon all the time. These are mostly printed on demand by Amazon, and the quality is really bad while also still being at a very high price. It's actually really weird. Check out this copy of Daybreak. This is older than me. The cover is a high-quality cardstock with a gloss, the paper is a lovely cream color with print that is very easy on the eyes, and the binding is sewn. Look at those arches, look at those signatures. This is what you want for a book that is going to last you multiple read-throughs. This book, if well cared for, may look just as nice in 50 years from now. It will survive many readings. This is what you want. Now let's compare something a little bit later. This copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra is from 2015, and it's not bad by any means, but it is still significantly worse. Now, the good parts. The cover has a nice matte texture, which I quite like. The paper stock is fine, not as good as the Daybreak edition I just showed you, but it's fine. It's a little whiter than the older books. The binding is glued. You can tell because it doesn't have those arches, just a straight line. That means there's just a layer of glue holding all of the pages together. This can snap, pages can fall out, the glue can degrade. That being said, if a book is flexible enough, like this is, then with careful handling it should last fine, and some glues will actually last a very long time. It depends on the publisher. The one thing you must absolutely avoid are hard covers with glued bindings. We'll come back to this in a moment because there is a horrible example of this that I want you to avoid at all costs. But in the meantime, for Cambridge in particular, this is what you really want to watch out for and avoid. New editions of Cambridge texts sold on Amazon aren't even printed by Cambridge, but are printed by Amazon itself on demand. And these are awful. This is my copy of The Gay Science, okay, from Cambridge. Cheap plasticky coating on the cover, flimsy glued binding that feels just limp, and terrible school printer quality paper. And despite all of this, they are still asking full price. This was like $40. Absolutely insane and disgraceful. That being said, the contents are the same, so go onto AbeBooks or something and get a used copy from a few years ago. It'll be the same content with much better construction. Aim for around 2010, maybe earlier. That's when they seem to have started to really dip in quality. Side note, one of the really weird things I've noticed about these Amazon print-on-demand editions, and what sort of gives it away that that's what you're dealing with, is that they all have this weird split in the text block. It really stands out, it's really ugly. Sometimes the quality of the print is actually fine, the paper stock's good, the cover's got a nice texture to it, but it still has this weird split in the text block. It's something to do with how they print it. I'm sure it's fine, but it's just really bizarre. If you see a text block that has that weird gap in the middle, where if you hold it sort of loosely by the spine, you can just see the text block just split into two distinct chunks, it's probably print on demand from Amazon. I don't know why that is the case, that just seems to be the tell. Anyways, Penguin. I mentioned the portable Nietzsche before. These again are Kaufmann translations. They're fine, they're far from luxurious, they will survive regular use. There are other Penguin translations of Nietzsche's books that are not by Kaufmann. I haven't read them, I can't speak to their quality. That being said, once again, there are no perfect translations. You're going to read multiple if you're serious. You will be fine. Now, the portable Nietzsche comes with Twilight of the Idols, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Antichrist. It's got a bunch of little fragments in there as well that are interesting. It's got sections from The Gay Science. I don't recommend this as your primary reading for those other books, but for Twilight of the Idols and The Antichrist, it's fine. For Zarathustra, it's fine. I do recommend getting a PDF at least of the Adrian Caro translation published by Cambridge, because he does specifically correct elements of the Kaufmann translation there. But this is fine. This will run you $30. It'll get you like 4 full books by Nietzsche. So it's a pretty good bargain. And the quality's fine. It's a glued binding, but it's flexible. The paper stock is not particularly high quality, but the print is clear. This is fine. This is a good travel book. This is a good beater edition to just bring around with you on the bus. Oxford World's Classics. This was a major tongue twister to say. I've had to record this bit over and over again, which is pointless because I haven't read any Nietzsche translations in the Oxford World's Classics series, but I have read other books by them. I own some of them. Same as the Penguin. They're fine. Most of the Penguin's Classics editions tend to have ink that rubs off really easily, so they look really tattered after just light use. The Oxford ones wear better. They have slightly cleaner print. I like them. I haven't read any of the Nietzsche translations. Once again, though, they are probably fine. You're going to be reading multiple translations if you're serious. Don't worry about it. Read what you have access to. Oxford's World's Classics is a reputable series. Just go for it. If that's what's there, just get it. Now, a publisher that makes me angry but which I will still recommend is Stanford. Stanford publishes a complete works of Nietzsche set that is not complete. It doesn't have Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and while marketed as the definitive editions, once again, no translation is perfect. This is mostly just marketing. All translations are necessarily flawed in some way. That said, some of their editions are recommended for translation quality in particular, especially those by Adrian Caro. He does their edition of the Joyous Science, he does Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morality, and he does some large collections of Nietzsche's unpublished notebooks, and these are tremendously valuable. However, do I recommend buying these? Yes, but with caveats. These volumes are, in paperback, normally priced. Not cheap, they're in the $30 to $45 range, but that's about how much you'll spend on a Cambridge edition. However, their quality has dipped significantly in recent years. They used to be very nice. If you go online, like onto Abe Books or something, and you look for Stanford Complete Works of Nietzsche editions, you will find some from 10 or so years ago. You will find just gorgeous hardback editions with cloth covers, sewn bindings, high quality paper stock, ribbons to bookmark your place. They are simply lovely. However, these are of the past. Recent hardcovers, sort of like the Amazon versions of Cambridge volumes, are still as expensive as the old ones, but are of astonishingly cheap quality. This is my copy of the Stanford edition of The Joyful Science. Cheap paper binding, no cloth. The pages are of awful, cheap paper stock. Just look at that ink bleed. The other page shows right through. And worst of all, the binding is glued. This is a hardcover. When you open up a hardcover that is glued, that puts stress on the binding. That binding will actually last less time than a paperback with a glued binding. This book will sadly not last serious use, which would be forgivable if it wasn't extremely expensive. This volume was over $100. I was choked when I received this in the mail. If you decide to purchase Stanford editions new, get the paperbacks. They are a fourth of the price. Here is my Stanford edition of Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morality. See how that paper doesn't bleed. And that flexible cover, even though it's cardboard, even though it will wear down at the edges, that will not crack the spine if you open it carefully. And honestly, now that I'm opening this, the paper feels better. You can't feel it obviously through the screen, but this is just a better product, and it's so much cheaper. The hardbacks, meanwhile, again, are made with cheap paper. They've got glued bindings that will wear out faster than the paperback editions, and they are 3 to 4 times the price of the paperbacks. Older used editions of the Stanford hardbacks, again, had sewn bindings and cloth covers. So if you find them used, maybe you'll luck out, but make sure you do your research before purchasing. I don't think the later volumes in this series ever came out in anything but these cheap versions, so I wouldn't even try with any version in the series that wasn't released prior to 2010. One of the reasons the Stanford editions make me so mad, though, is that they aren't even available in PDF forms in many cases. So unlike the others, where you can just find online a PDF of one of these books to compare it with a lesser translation, with the Stanford, often you can't. You need a hard copy in order to make reference to it, which is crummy. I don't believe in gatekeeping human knowledge behind an arbitrary paywall, and these books are ridiculously expensive, for no reason. They are made of cheap, economical materials, set up to look like luxury items. Like, this is a scam. This makes me mad. Screw Stanford, in all seriousness. That being said, the important thing, again, is to learn not to decorate your bookshelf. Keep in mind that almost all of the choicest translations can be read online for a very low cost, or for free, ideally. If you must have a hard copy, though, but you're on a budget, I highly recommend picking up the Basic Writings of Nietzsche published by the Modern Library and the Portable Nietzsche published by Penguin. These are translations, again, by Walter Kaufmann. They aren't perfect, but no translation is perfect, and despite what you'll see people say on Reddit, they are perfectly fine. Again, every translation is flawed. Get PDFs of other translations and read the notes. You'll learn more about Nietzsche doing this than if you had simply read a single, better, quote-unquote, translation of Nietzsche by itself. And with that, happy reading. And before I go, a very warm thank you to my patrons and my viewers. You are the ones who keep this channel going, and I love that my audience is smarter than I am. And as always, thank you for listening, and take care.